So this is Unpacking K-5 Math for Caregivers, and today we are going to talk about what makes counting powerful. And Tempo, I know you've been thinking about this, so.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that often as adults that we think counting is a very elementary, childish thing to do, right? And that kids, once they hit first grade, maybe, I don't know, or shouldn't be counting anymore, right? When the bottom line is that counting is a very powerful activity for kids to engage in, for them to notice patterns in our number system, for them to make sense of quantity. And so I want to tell a little story and then I'll let somebody else talk. I was in an elementary classroom, a local elementary classroom, kindergarten classroom earlier this academic year. And the kids in that classroom, every Wednesday, they count collections of objects. So they grab a bag of like some sort of fun object and they count them. But what was so powerful about the moment was watching the kids and how they were organizing their counts. And so I actually am going to share my screen if I can. Can I share, Paula? Can you give me sharing capabilities? So what happened, because I actually had something ready to show, what happened in that classroom is that while the kids were counting by ones, you could tell that the teacher had been doing work with them so that they organized their, so they had like these little frogs, for example. They organized their frogs very, very purposefully as they counted, which was so cool to see. Let me see. Okay, so, well, so they organized it. I was going to show a 10 frame.
Share?
It's not letting me, no, it's not letting me share. It's okay. So they organized their frogs into a 10 frame, which there's a 10 frame behind Paula actually, and on her, yeah, right there with the 3 little counters. They arranged their frogs into these 2 rows of 5. And then they had like 6 frogs left over sitting over here in a pile. So the students were able to recognize, oh, I have 10 in this pile and 6. And so it was helping them build this notion of 10 that we talked about in our last video cast, right? That they filled up that 10 frame and then they had some left over. And my point of saying this is that the fact that they were engaging in this counting activity, they were building other ideas through that. It wasn't just counting by ones, they were organizing their count in such a way, and they had been counting throughout the year and were trying to become more efficient in their counting and how they were organizing their stuff, organizing the materials they were using. So counting is a very rigorous activity for students to engage in, and it's important for kids to count objects. And I don't want that to be undermined. I mean, I sometimes think that we think that it's an easy thing for kids to do, but instead it's not. It's very rigorous and they learn a lot of ideas from it. So and I'll let one of you build on that.
Yeah, and later if you want to come back, I think now you can share your screen. Sorry about that. I want to tell you a story too that happened to me last week, and with my son who is almost 25. And he was telling me about how he counts things in 3s, and that's very easy for him as a way to organize, both because he sees 3s easily, and of course by now he can 3, 6, 9, you know, it's a really quick way for him to count. And it just occurred to me that here I am with my son who's 25, and he's telling me how he's organizing his counting in a conversation we had when we had a lot of objects and we were trying to quickly see how many, that counting by 3s was super efficient for him, which makes, again, counting powerful.
Temple, you want to try to share your screen, or should I keep moving?
Sure, let me, yeah, I mean, I was just going to show. There we go. I just showing so we can show the caregivers what a 10 frame looks like. And so as you can imagine, pretend that these were, the kids didn't even have a 10 frame, right? But they were counting little frogs. And so they laid the frogs out in these 2 rows of 5 and then had the leftover pile over on the side. So clearly the teacher had set up the structure of encouraging them to do that. But my point is, as kids count, they'll start counting by 2s. Or organizing their counts in very strategic ways that gives you a lot of information about what they understand about quantity. But so counting just builds these ideas.
Yeah, and I would say two things. One is the parents and guardians might want to take a look at that website. It looks like something that's available to everybody.
Yeah, maybe we can, we will make sure that that URL is at the, maybe at the bottom of the slide. Or,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the other thing is that a lot of times this doesn't happen spontaneously for kids, and that's why they need practice, and that's why the tens frame is such a powerful structure that you'll see in kindergarten. And I encourage the teachers I work with to continue to use tens frames in first, second, third grade. In third grade, when we're starting to really think about powers of 10, you want them to be able to see 5 10 frames and right away know that's 5 times 10. So it's a powerful tool, and that structures their thinking, but they still sometimes need to touch and play with things to make sense of that. One thing you may not have noticed as a caregiver, but it's important to think about, is whether or not your student can count on from any number. So you might have a young student who you're thinking, well, counting, bam, check, they got that. But if you, somebody was just telling me the other day about a kid who every time he holds up his 2 pairs of 5, his hands, he has to start from the beginning to count up. He doesn't trust that he has 5 fingers here. So he can't go, well, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And eventually you'd want kids to be able to say 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So you'll have kids who can count like a demon, right? They can count, but you need to also check to see, well, can I count from a certain number? What number comes after 17? What number comes after 23? And then eventually, what number comes before? So counting back and forth from any number is actually really important for kids as well.
Yeah, and Valerie, I want to reiterate the counting backwards too. You know, being able to go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The microwave is the best for that, at least in my house. It always was. You know, let's start at 56 seconds, you know, and then you start counting backwards. Because when we start with subtraction, being able to count backwards is so powerful, right? If you have a big number, 56, I don't know, take away 3, you really should just count backwards to solve that problem. But you have to know that you can't count backwards and know how to.
And I was going to add one other thought is that remember that sometimes kids can rotely count, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but they may not be able to count objects. And so the example that I was given at the beginning was object counting, where the kids in that classroom were counting objects. But I'll add one more thing in terms of you know, this notion of rote counting. One thing that you can do as a caregiver is if you're having your first grader practicing counting by 5s, you could record that count symbolically to see what do they notice about those numbers. That they notice that pattern of all of those numbers either end in a 5 or a 0, right? So that they're starting to notice some patterns about what's happening symbolically as well.
Which again is another way to get at the numeration system, which we spoken about earlier. I want to pick up on something I think we talked about in the last one, which is also about counting, which is that we count all kinds of different things in different units. So if a student understands that adding 2/5 and 3/5 is really just counting up 2 and 3, but I just have a different unit, the unit is fifths. That's powerful. They can apply this thing that they should have mastered now. They're counting, they know how to count, they get the rhythm of counting. But then to understand that that I can count in fifths, I can count in hundredths, I can count in eighths, I can count by any unit I can count is also really important.
You know, I haven't thought about this until right now, but it just occurred to me the power of counting by different units when you're doing division. You know, oftentimes that's what you are doing. How many 3s in this number? And when you're doing division by fraction is the same thing. Right. How many quarters in 6? Mm-hmm. And so being able to count by quarters to answer those questions, or count by 3s, then it's a very powerful way for division as well. And honestly, just connected all this as we were talking about it.
Nice. All right. Do we have any thoughts? What do we want to send people away thinking about counting?
Count.
Count.
I also want parents or caregivers for elementary students to not dismiss the power of counting too, like counting things that come in groups, you know, counting the 4 packs of pudding that you have in the refrigerator that have 6 puddings in each pack, you know, and thinking about counting in those ways as well.
Yeah, I want to build on that as my final thought is to say that would be a beautiful activity, again, to think about the unit where it's like, okay, I have 12 eggs, but I have 1 dozen eggs, right? I have 8 Pop-Tarts and I have 4 packs of Pop-Tarts and I have 1 box of Pop-Tarts. So, you know, we have to always be thinking about the unit when we're counting. What unit are you counting, right? And we learn to count with this assumed unit of 1, but it gets us in a bad habit because then when we start to count other things, we don't realize we're counting. So if we said 1, 1, 2 ones, 3 ones, 4 ones, it might set us up, but that's maybe a little too much. But at some point we need to make sure they understand that this idea of counting a like unit applies to other things.
And then it goes beyond, you know, the very young grades, right?
Yeah.
As we're talking about, when you begin thinking that I'm counting fractional units, you know, that's already 3rd, 4th, 5th grades, and continue on being able to do that. And also as we are counting, I love that example of I have a box with 3 packs inside, you know, and so you can count how many boxes, how many packs. And again, that's so connected to one way of thinking about multiplication, right? Because it's repeated groups that builds a whole connection there as you are counting different units and connecting them.
Yeah, and it builds right up into algebra, right? When we talked about combining like terms, right? I mean, it's all about the unit. It all goes back to the unit.
True. And we say that, right? Okay, how many x's do I have versus how many x squares do I have?
Yeah.
In a way, we are counting them later in algebra too.
Yeah.
All right, have fun counting.
All right, that was
counting
good.
is powerful.